Welcome everybody. It is an absolute pleasure for me to have with me today Art Costa and Bena Kallick. Art and Bena, I was thinking earlier about when I first sort of came across you, and Art, it was you that I met first, and I think it was in the late 90s. It was a long time ago, and you have both been such a huge influence on my thinking and my career. And it's a pleasure to be able to talk to you today about the habits of mind. So perhaps for our audience that are new to the habits, and I'm not sure, Art or Bena, if you want to take this question, if you could give us a little bit of a history, so where did they come from, how were they derived, and talk us through the beginnings of the habits of mind.
Okay. Many years ago, like in early 1980s, the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development here in the US invited me to edit a book, which I agreed to. And it was called Developing Minds. And what I did was to write to leaders in philosophy and education and thinking skills and cognition from around the world, and invited them to describe their understanding and their descriptions of effective, successful thinkers. So I wrote to people like Reuven Feuerstein in Israel and Edward de Bono in Malta, Guy Claxton in England, David Perkins at Harvard, and so on. So these were leaders in the field from around the world. And they sent me their descriptions of what effective thinkers do. And as I was editing these, I was, of course, reading all of their articles, and I began to see some patterns because many of them were saying the same thing. For example, Reuven Feuerstein said, well, they restrain their impulsivity. And Edward de Bono says, well, they collect all facts before they make a judgment. And David Perkins talked about people who are not good thinkers would be hasty thinkers. And I said, well, what they're all saying is that they think first and act later. And and that was just one of them. There were many similarities. So I began to see these patterns, and I began to kind of collect them and classify them. And I started off with about 7, and then it went to 10, and then 12, and gradually the list began to grow over the years, not just from that book, until now that we have 16. And so they really started by the analysis of what good, effective, efficacious, successful thinkers do. And so I gave labels to them, like they would be able to think well with other people. So they knew how to work in groups and think in groups. So we call it thinking interdependently. And another would say that they could easily shift their thinking from big perspective or narrow perspective from the big picture, or being very analytical, and they were able to take another person's point of view. So we call that flexibility of thinking. So this is how it came to be. And over the years, we have added to the list, and we have never found anything that detracted from the list. We always got reinforced. Bena joined me, and we wrote a book that we have available. And actually, we wrote full books initially, and we changed them to just words like persisting or persistence to an action word. We found that it was better if we talked about acting in action words like persisting rather than persistence. Rather than just talking about cooperation, it was thinking interdependently. Rather than just being amazed at the world, it was responding with wonderment and awe. So we formulated them all into verb forms. And then we wrote our books, and that's how it all started.
And they're the books that I first discovered. I remember years ago, I picked up a whole lot of books, multiple intelligences and thinking skills and Edward de Bono's work. And
Right.
I was plowing through them, and I found your work, and I spent this is the one that sort of sits above. It's the one that captures it all. Can I ask a follow-up question? You said you were researching and reading and editing for that book, Developing Minds, and you reached out to all those researchers, and they were saying effective thinkers did these things, and you saw the similarities and the overlaps and the commonalities
right.
there. Who were the effective thinkers on the other side of their research? Who were they looking at that they were saying these people are doing this thinking well?
Oh, wait a minute. Clarify that. Who was doing the?
So
Who were they?
Who were they researching when they came to these conclusions? What people were they looking at?
Yes. Well, I didn't pursue that to find out who they were considering to be good thinkers, but I did read their writings, and the ones that I mentioned were not the only ones. There were other two: Robert Schwartz, Robert Ennis, and so on. Were additional people. So it was from their own writings that they had analyzed what effective thinkers did, what were their actions and their patterns of behavior. So this is what they reported to me.
Okay, so they were looking at the, sorry, Bena, you were going to say?
No, I was just going to clarify that I think it was from their research in looking at what they would define as effective thinkers. So it's a kind of interesting question, because we never got to the place of saying, you know, what were your criteria? What was the basis of your research? But I think that we were certainly, I mean, I think Art was certainly looking at this question of what are they observing? And also remember, some of them were philosophers. They weren't all people who were working in the academic area of education. Right. A number of them were philosophers, and were very much influenced by people like John Dewey and other, you know, and also people like Jean Piaget. So there was a lot of research that they were resting on the shoulders of, all of which was looking at this question of what develops that cognitive capacity to be a reasoning, analytic, as we sort of try to summarize these days, critical and creative thinker.
Yes, we also, I did ask them, or pursue a little bit, what we mean by successful people. And it was not financial. It's not that the people were rich, but rather that they were goal-oriented, that they had a following, that people admired them, that they had a set of goals in life that they worked toward. And when I say people had a following, I remember I had an automobile mechanic who worked on my car. This was a long time ago, but he worked on my car, and he was very popular. He had a lot of clients and a lot of customers. But he had my car up on a hoist one time, and he was listening to my transmission, and he got out a stethoscope and put it in his ears and held it up to the transmission. And I thought at the time, wow, this is really gathering data with all senses. And it's that kind of thing. The people were very thorough. People that were admired because they were thorough. They were very goal-oriented. And so it was not financial, although that could be, but finance was not the indicator of success. It was more that people had a set of values. They lived by them. They professed them. People had a following to them, and they were successful. And they were people who were doctors and lawyers and auto mechanics, as I said. And it was not that there was any one profession that was examined.
I often ask the people that I work with, who do you consider characteristically successful? Without overthinking the definition, who comes to mind as successful? And I think they're the people that you're talking about, the ones that we don't have to measure it by money or status or prestige, but we just know that these people are successful.
That's it.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you.
Maybe just to add one little piece to that is
of course, always.
That, I think people who are successful feel confident in the fact that they're doing important, productive, successful work. So there's something about the intrinsic experience that people have that isn't measured by external, but by the kind of experience of knowing that they're doing something that's well done.
Yeah.
Good.
I wonder, and I don't want to make this interview about me, but this the definition I've come to use in that context, and I wonder if this would apply to the people you've talked about, is that success is about achieving a goal that requires effort, doing hard things, growing, developing, not just doing easy things. And I wonder if that's what the people you're talking about were recognizing.
Sure.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is the challenge of knowing that you're never there. I think when we talk about habits of mind, people want to know, well, you know, how do you know if you're exemplary, if you're mastering, if you're completed? And I think we always feel that the true person who is feeling successful in their work is also always growing, always curious, always creatively looking for what's the next move, what's the next thing. And I think that's very much in line with a lot of the work that you do on the Agile Learner and on really thinking about the growth mindset and imagining. So if there is no end in mind, is that satisfying? And I think for people who are dispositionally oriented, as we have defined them, we would say, yes, that's very satisfying.
Thank you for tying that up so well.
Based on those descriptions of what successful people did, we formulated a theory, and that theory is that if those indeed are the attributes and dispositions and characteristics of successful people, then could we teach them in school so that students would be successful as well? That's really how we got started. And so we took the set of habits of mind and helped teachers infuse them into their curriculum and instruction so that kids would learn these habits that would be successful to them, not only in school, but throughout their life.
Yeah, which raises the interesting question. It's been 25 years or more now that we've been working around that space.
That's right.
What have we seen? What have been some of the success stories from working in, let's start with schools, in that time? When schools have adopted the habits of mind, what sort of outcomes have resulted?
Yes.
Well, if we took and matched up the definition we just gave for success, we would say that those school cultures had success because of what we really observed, which is the continuous learning, the growing, the interest in growing a culture, the challenge of meeting new situations and trying to think flexibly. I mean, I think what we've learned most, again, is that people who get deeply committed to habits of mind are really those people who are, as a school culture, we see that the whole culture reflects that new teachers coming in reflect the curiosity, the investigative quality of it, the idea that good teaching never ends in terms of pursuit of good teaching, and that we're always looking to see how do we respond more effectively with students? How do we engage students? All of the questions that I think as educators trouble us, struggle, and also give us the joy and the feeling of accomplishment when we see the lights in the kids' eyes, that I got it, I understand this, I really am excited about this. So it's really, I think it's really, in so many ways, I guess people would say it's ephemeral, but I think it's not. I think it's in the air. It's in the dust of the school. I think when you walk in, you almost know immediately whether it's happening, even when there aren't very specific signs about it, but you hear the way people talk, you hear the way they are constantly challenging themselves, and you hear that they're very consciously using the language of the habits because they've really said that this is what they really believe. And we just had a beautiful example from a teacher who wrote to us and said, in COVID, here's what I'm really understanding. Here's how I'm being challenged to be thinking flexibly. And here's what I'm learning about listening with understanding and empathy. In other words, this teacher, and I think she's also a school leader, she is, now that I think about it, is really saying, you know, this is what I'm really recognizing is something that is so critical to meeting the challenge of what this pandemic is putting upon us. So it's saying it's not only that it's important in the long run, but it's also so responsive to the immediacy of the challenging situations that we live in on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think there's some additional supportive to support that notion about the importance of it and how it has long-lasting effect. A couple of things. One is that at Waikiki School in Hawaii, which is the longest the school with the longest history of habits of mind, they did two things. One of the teachers did her doctoral study to follow up with students going on into middle school and high school, and did they use the habits of mind when they were confronted with problems. So she searched out the graduates of the school and went to them and gave them problems to solve. And yes, students did indeed refer to the habits of mind to help them solve those problems. Another thing that Waikiki did just this last year was to seek out graduates of their school who had taken positions in like the state government and went on into jobs into Hawaiian culture. And they invited them to school and they interviewed them to find out what the habits of mind meant to them. And yes, those habits of mind are long lasting. The people said that they still use them in their job as doctors, as nurses, or whatever. The other thing is, a third, I think, very important one is that we have found, and James, you will know this, we have found that they're universal. We have schools, as you well know, in Australia, and you helped with some in South Africa and New Zealand and Hong Kong and Cambodia and England and Wales. And so there's a universal quality. It's not just in one culture, but it is pan-cultural or trans, what's the word I'm saying? It is used throughout the world, and all cultures seem to find a home and the application of the habits of mind.
Beautiful. So we've painted a lovely picture there from saying that we observed, or not we, you observed through other people's research, these high achieving people, these people that were characteristically successful,
Right.
Identified the habits of mind, asked the question, can we teach those to kids? Have followed those kids through in schools like Waikiki, and to see them rise to their own success as adults and engaging in those habits of mind. So you painted a lovely picture of how we saw what successful people were doing, asked, can we teach them to young children? And when we do, what happens? And you've said that we've seen that same pattern follow through, which is beautiful.
Yeah, I think there's one more too. Over the years, and most recently, we have learned from leaders and authors in the field, like Tony Wagner and others, who have described what are the needs in an environment that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. You know those. What are the skills that are necessary? And indeed, while they don't call them necessarily the same thing, but they think, you have to be able to communicate well. Well, yes, we agree with that. We want called listening with understanding and empathy, and communicating with precision, thinking and communicating with clarity. You have to be able to work cooperatively. Well, yeah, we said this, thinking interdependently is the most part of it. We have to think creatively. We have to think. So in other words, those same skills have been reinforced over years with the changing culture and the changing times of the world, those habits of mind still remain as core, essential characteristics of successful people.
And that's the really enduring and beautiful part about the habits, I think, that other people have come up with similar answers, that they said, you know, in a volatile, uncertain, changeable, ambiguous world, we need these sorts of things. And people go, oh yeah, they're the habits of mind. Or someone else is doing research into entrepreneurship and they say they need to persist and they need to do this. They, oh yeah, they're the habits of mind. And personally, that's been one of the huge strengths for me around the habits of mind, is that we come at them from all different angles, and it gives a strength and authenticity to it. I mean, there's a lot of good ideas out there, but I think the beauty that both of you have given to the world is the clarity that you didn't create them. You didn't sit down one day and write a list. You said, what do successful people actually do through that research, and can we help people do it? So let me ask the question and change the direction slightly. Here's this beautiful list of dispositions, ways of behaving, patterns of behavior. And as a parent, I would want my child to be raised in an environment like that. Now, maybe my school is or isn't working with the habits of mind, but as a parent, what do the habits of mind have to offer me to help me in my role as a parent and with my children in my home rather than in an institution?
Bena, you want to respond?
Go ahead.
Well, I think several things as parents. First of all, if your child goes to a school where they're using the habits of mind, I think it's very important that you serve as a partner with the staff of the school in that educational process. And the reason why is because as students hear about and use the habits of mind in school, it becomes reinforced when you as a parent talk with them about it as a parent, so that we're using them and reinforcing it at home as well as in school. Parents, for example, might talk about how they themselves have had to manage their impulsivity, how they are working on goals and they are persisting. It might be that parents talk about at their work, at the office, or in my work as a nurse or whatever. Here are the habits of mind that I use and how it's important. So the parents then find that they reinforce it through modeling, through talking with their kids about it, through recognizing the kids when they stick to a task over time. Parents say, wow, you really persisted on that task. Or you really listened to your sister with understanding and empathy, something on that order. So that parents become part of the process. And what's very interesting is that parents themselves learn the habits of mind right along with the students. We're not talking about just kid stuff. Habits of mind are as good for the parents as they are for kids. And so we're all learning them together at the same time. And this helps kids a lot. It's something that we call attention density. And what we mean by that is that the more frequent is attention paid to the habits of mind, the more they are internalized over time. It's a psychological term, but what it means basically is that the more emphasis that you place on it, the more opportunities that you have to use them, the more awareness that you build that you are using them. That's what tends to internalize them inside the mind of the user.
Attention density. That's an interesting term. I haven't come across that one, but I understand what you mean. As we reinforce it from different angles. Yeah, Ben, I didn't mean to interrupt you though. So.
No, that's okay. I like to be intrigued by new language, sure. Yeah. I would just take the perspective also of what it means to be a parent and what it means to really be able to listen to the voice of your children and to really feel like it's important to hear what they have to say and to really honor the fact that they are thinkers and that they have the capacity to do important thinking, and to not always feel like it's important to tell them how to think, but to rather hear what's going on inside their heads. So I think that to me, one of the most important things that parents learn very often is listening with understanding and empathy, really managing impulsivity. Instead of jumping to say, let me tell you what you need to do, trying to understand how they're thinking about what they perceive they need to do. Really learning how to ask the kinds of questions that bring them out instead of being able to always impose their own ideas. That's a very, very delicate balance that parents need to understand. It really invites kids to be a part of the co-creation of their lives with the parents. And I think sometimes, too often, I see anyway, parents who are always ready to impose, say goodbye, say thank you to the nice people, be sure that you, and all of these are admonitions and cautions rather than inviting them to recognize that gratitude is a part of life, that responding with wonderment and awe is a part of life. So I think sometimes we take away from kids their capacity to be the independent thinkers, not that they have total authority to do whatever they want, but to really take into the fact how they're thinking about things. So, for example, I find that parents are what we call helicopter parents. They're constantly flying over the kids, making sure they do well, they do this, they do that. But what happens in the end is that they have lived a life of compliance rather than living a life of really finding out and discovering who they are and what their greatest talents and capacities are. So I think from a parenting perspective, when they begin to read about the habits of mind, it kind of tells them, and I've seen this over and over, it tells them how to really engage with their children rather than trying to be on top of everything that they do, and how to really appreciate the fact that every person isn't cut out to do the same thing. So to really help them find out what gives them some passion, some curiosity, some understanding. I was just reading beautifully about someone who said, the most important moment in my life, I had a very difficult childhood. Nobody ever read to me. And I was constantly told in school I'm not a reader. And it took me years to discover the fact that I actually did like to read, but that I needed to choose what I read and I needed to really get engaged with it. And so the most touching moment of my life was when I had our first child, and I held that child close to my body and I read to him. And I suddenly realized this is what I've been missing, the opportunity to really be there and to be present. And I think that the habits of mind are a wonderful set of dispositions for reminding us of those beautiful moments when we are there with our children rather than being helicopter there.
Wow, what a beautiful story from both of you. It seems to me that when I asked the question, I was thinking about, as a parent, how do I nurture these habits of mind in my children? But then as you've told these stories, you've said the impact it has on the parent themselves. And in doing that, the whole concept of the family, how the family embraces the habits of mind to nurture a more thoughtful environment, I suppose. Yeah, really beautiful, really beautiful. Thank you. Gee, I've been working with the habits of mind now for more than 25 years, and that's a new story, a new way of looking at it for me. Thank you. That's really lovely.
So now you have two, attention deficit and
not attention deficit. Is attention?
No, not deficit.
Not attention deficit.
Density.
Attention density. Sorry. We know attention deficit. Sorry
attention
about
deficit.
that.
Yeah, that's what I'm suffering right now.
Yeah.
All right. Excuse me. Look, I also want to talk about the business space. But before we do, that was such a rich conversation about parenting and family, and really the concept of family that came through there about, you know, your beautiful story, Bena. Is there anything else I'm increasingly working with parents, and I'm working with them often around mindset. They come to me from that perspective. And Bena, you mentioned that indirectly when you were saying that the example you gave of the person who was told they're just not a reader. And how that built a fixed mindset boundary around them. It took the habits of mind to actually tear down that boundary and realize they could be a reader. So I'm wondering, when I talk to parents about mindset and about habits of mind, I say that the mindset is the understanding you're capable of growth, but the habits of mind are the behaviors you need to actually achieve that growth. So I'm just wondering if there's anything else you want to add to that story. I'm not looking for anything in particular, but I just don't want to leave another gem like that one lying around.
Well, I guess as I'm thinking about it alongside you right now, so one of the things I really love about your work is the idea that you're putting those things together and they're so synergistic, because it's not as if they're sequential. I don't believe they are. But I do think that the synergies is what makes them true. It makes them authentic. That if I truly believe that there is, when, as Carol Dweck refers to it, that there is a growth mindset, then I think that the idea that we're growing our children and that we're not kind of modeling them. It's not like clay that we've been given to model. It's like we're really giving them the opportunity to grow. And the growing is quite different, because there are optimal moments in which you know that the growth can be challenged and can be pushed forward, because it's kind of like, I think about, a plant where the buds are there. And you know that there's all those optimal moments in which you can make the plant grow, or you can not water it sufficiently, not allow it to flourish, not allow it to bloom. And as a result, you have a plant, but you don't really have the full blossoming of the plant. So I guess I think very much about your work of the agility, the capacity to allow yourself to push that bud to open, but not to prematurely open, and to really, as it's opening, to recognize the growth that's happening and to celebrate that, and to know that it's not the end, because it's one of those plants that comes up every year. It's not one that's only occasional. There's something about, I often think that the metaphors that we use in education particularly, but I think in the world in general, are very much metaphors that go against what we are talking about right now. Because we talk about, our metaphors are really ones that say, for example, when a student doesn't do well, they say, I bombed out. They don't say, oh, wow, I didn't do this well, and so I've got another chance. If you've bombed out, you're done. You're fried. Yeah. So there's a lot of that kind of war metaphor that we have that says, you're done. It's over. Rather than the ecological metaphors that talk about growth and blossoming and the right soil for learning. So I think that is something that you do with your landscape, with your ecological metaphors when you use them, and with the whole understanding that we are trying to create, I think all of us who are working on this believe that the synergies is really in the soil, the way you cultivate it, the way you make sure that you're paying attention to it, and that you're not just letting it kind of be there, but you're actually continually hoping for it to grow, to be more than what it was when you first planted it.
Yeah, and I think the challenges are what give the opportunity to grow. That, and I'm running the risk here as I'm thinking through the metaphor that you're building of the plant and the challenges and the right moments and all the rest of it. Are you suggesting the habits of mind are fertilizer?
Nutrients.
Allows the growth to happen. So. Dear, oh dear. Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you. That's and it is. We do have a lot of those metaphors that are end, and we steer away from struggle instead of saying, well, what a great struggle that didn't succeed, but look, what's the next struggle going to bring? And bring those habits of mind to bear and use them in different ways to continue to grow. And juxtaposition you put there between the modeling the clay and allowing it to grow is powerful. It's really a good one to think about. Did I interrupt you then? Were you about to add something?
No.
No, that's right. All right. There are a lot of people I work with that go, all right, schools, it's great, James. Schools, do your work in schools, but I work with people. I work with adults. I'm in the workplace. What have you got for habits of mind in the workplace? How do I do this? What do they mean? Why should I be interested? So I'm curious. We sort of touched on a few examples before, Art. You were talking about the research from the students in Waikiki that went through and were succeeding in their roles and brought the habits of mind with them. But I'm curious to know examples or perhaps suggestions about how the habits of mind, not in schools, not in families, but sort of in the workplace. Yeah. Talk to me around those ideas.
Well, you might want to take, or anybody might want to take a look at what the researchers and the leaders are saying about the new workplace. There's a new normal, but it's really not normal. It's going to be the new abnormal. The workplace that is emerging is not what it was 10, 15 years ago. The old model of leadership, the old model of an organization is giving way. It's not working anymore. Instead, what we're seeing is much more leadership development within the group. We're seeing more participation by the employees. We're finding much more that people need to have a stakehold in the organization and be part of it. And so that top-down notion of control and power is giving way to one of participation and involvement of the worker in the direction, and therefore the leadership is emerging from the workers themselves. Another is a description of what that leadership looks like. And I'm just amazed and blown over when you read what the leadership of the future looks like, because what is it? One, knowing how to respond empathically. That's a big one. Knowing how to share the vulnerability, to share the mistakes that I've made and how I'm learning from it. The ability to be a continuous learner. The ability to communicate values and to be able to state the values of an organization well. The ability to work cooperatively with other people. They're all there. And the description of the new modern leader of the business world are the behaviors, or they must manifest the behaviors of the habits of mind. It's very apparent to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think those descriptions, just as you're saying, Art, are really based on the fact that we are no longer of the delusion, should I say, or illusion of the fact that we live with certainty. We don't.
Oh,
I think that there is a major change that's taken place from the factory model, where we thought that there was a level of linear certainty. Not that it necessarily existed, but for factories to really be successful, it had to be that way. You know, and so what happened is that we made a shift into the information age. And when we made that shift, we were then really saying we can no longer imagine that everything that is there is all that is known. And I think that that's a big departure from the way we thought about it when we were in the factory model, because we really thought we were developing widgets. We knew what the line required to do it. We did it, we repeated it, we did it, we repeated it, and we were highly successful in that we repeated lots of them, and they brought to what we call scale, and we then were able to make this into something that was a so-called useful product to our society. Little by little, we started to see that wear away, and we started to be now purchasing information, wanting to know more from the news media, wanting to know more from all the kinds of sources that we had. And we were trying to really understand that the information age was as much about being informed, so to speak. Well, as soon as we decided we wanted to be informed, we realized that that led us to, and I love what Stephen Colbert, very wonderful comedian, says. He calls it to a level of truthiness, which is we started to really question ourselves. What is truth? And we started to look at all the questions of fact, and what is fact, and what is science. And we challenged constantly all of those things that we thought we knew. And because we continually uncover something we never imagined, I think we're in an age now where leadership is really what you're saying. It's more about allowing the environment for people to be thinking flexibly, to be thinking interdependently, to really think first. I mean, some of the most popular design thinking in terms of solving problems in organizations starts with empathy. So the first thing you do is you listen with empathy. You try to understand what your customers want. I think that Steve Jobs was an amazing leader in the sense that he said, not only do I want to think about what they want, but I want to think ahead of what they want and show them what's possible and then have them want it. What a difference from the way we used to think.
There's a lot of parallel with the story you just told me and the story of family you told me 10 minutes ago as well, about not just telling the workers what to do, but allowing them to grow. Art, what was your term again? Not attention deficit, attention density.
Density.
Yeah, that's right. Because I can now imagine in that environment, if you're wanting to grow those types of co-leaders, I suppose we could talk about in our organisation, people that are growing with the organisation, filtering the habits of mind through the leaders, through the employees, getting that density would allow you to experience that growth that Ben is talking about of the employees as well as the leaders.
Absolutely. I think that's another very important consideration of the new workplace, and that is that it becomes a learning organization. We're all in it to learn more together, and we create conditions that we're all learning and sharing that learning with each other.
Yeah. I remember my father-in-law spent his entire career in the same organisation.
Yep.
And I just don't see that happening anymore. But
no, I know. My grandchildren are talking about, I'll spend a couple of years in this job, and then I'm looking at another job, and I'm going to move to Los Angeles instead of living in New York. And I said, wait a minute, in our day, we chose a profession and we stayed in it for our entire lives. That's not the way they're thinking anymore. They're looking at each couple of years as a learning opportunity, and then they take that learning to the next job. And they continue throughout a lifetime that way. Different than us.
I'm sorry, I thought you were finished. I was going to say, Art, it really speaks very powerfully to the idea of why we need to really think about interdisciplinary learning and not keep ourselves locked in a particular discipline as if that's the way we will know. And that speaks to our gathering data from all senses.
Yeah, for sure.
And for a capacity to behave in a way that allows us to operate in those different environments, that what we carry with us are our dispositions, our habits of mind into those different roles at different times, that we might need to retrain about the content, the individual specific nature of the job, but the way we behave in that job. Yeah.
Just an example, coming back to another one of my granddaughters, she graduated from Cal Poly in California Polytechnic Institute, and they had a career day. And so many people from industries came and interviewed the students to see if they could hire them. So she was interviewed by Google. And now my granddaughter was a history major. They never asked her one question about history. It was all about things that she's done creatively, how well she worked with other people, her love of continuous learning, whether she was a good reader or not. Those were the questions that got her the job, and she's still working with Google. But it had nothing to do with content.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting just that they had a career day. This really probably should be a careers day.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. I'm sitting, I'm staring in the air because I'm thinking, and like I said, we opened the interview and I said 25 more years I've known you, worked with both of you, had these sort of conversations over and over again, and it's such a pleasure to have a conversation like this and hear new things, to have different perspectives, to have different analogies and stories told. It's a real pleasure. And I think there's something deeper in there, but I can't quite grasp it at the moment, but I'll get there. Keeping our mind focused on the corporate side of things, the sort of businesses and the need to help people in the development of their careers, to support the business, but also support each other as we change careers and changing nature of work, the changing nature of any one business as it moves through this very changeable time. We've all been working on developing this habits of mind profiling tool, this way of looking at our habits of mind. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on why you think this profiling type tool, this ability to take a snapshot of your habits of mind, your employees' habits of mind, might be useful in that sort of context.
Well, I think one is that it helps people analyze themselves. If I know something about me, then I can match some of my behavior with some of my goals and my values and beliefs. So if, for example, I think that listening to other people is important, and I find that I'm really not that good a listener, I want to say, well, I want to become better at that. I want to become more skillful. I want to use it more often. I want to have other people recognize me as being a good listener. It changes my identity. And I want to be identified as a person who is flexible, who is cooperative, and so on. So it's a way of analyzing myself so that I can grow and improve. So I think it's very valuable in that way. For any person who is self-directed, they're going to want to learn more about themselves and to display themselves to others in a consistent manner. So I think that a profile helps me, or helps them, discover more about me and helps me then set goals for myself.
Yeah,
I think also the 360 view of it is equally important, which is, it may be that this is the way I see myself, and that's often very important and very powerful. But I also am very eager to know how other people see me, because maybe I imagine I'm more than I am or less than I am. Actually, my experience has been people tend to underestimate who they are, not overestimate who they are. And so it's really to be able to say that these are things I want to work on, and that I see how other people perceive me in meetings, whatever it is, and that I can get better at it. I think the idea is that the profile has, as is foundational understanding, I can get better at it. Because just knowing it is necessary, but insufficient. But as soon as I know that I can get better at it, then I'm willing to work on it. So if I can get the profile and it tells me I'm not a very good listener, or that I see that people are telling me I'm not a very good listener, I want to know, well, what can I do to get better at it? What do I have to work on? What strategies? Is there anything that helps me to know how to get to another place with it? So the profile, in my opinion, is ongoing. It isn't a once and done. It's really I take this, I learn more about myself, I then make a commitment to thinking about getting better at it. I develop some strategies that are going to help me to get better at it. And then I want to know, so how am I doing now?
And in that way, the intent we have for it is very much a developmental tool. It varies from a lot of other profiling type tools that are commonly used in businesses that are meant to sort of categorize you and send those very fixed old messages we've been talking about. Whereas this is meant to say, well, here are the areas to nurture and to develop and to improve on. And I think that's one of the great riches of what we're working on, and it's an exciting sort of space. Look, we're almost, I'm very conscious of your time, and I'm very grateful for the time you've given us. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to add about, your 25, 30 years experience with habits of mind? It's just in a sentence or two, if you could wrap up the career, that'd be great.
Well, I think there's one thing that I would mention, and that is, and as you know, James, because you've been part of this, what we see happening in schools that have adopted the habits of mind, I think is truly phenomenal. And for example, when an entire staff and a community, including the parents, adopt a common language, so they're all talking about the same thing, and there's a sharing of events and sharing of indicators that they all share. What it does is to build a community in the school that goes beyond anything else that I've ever seen. I know that when we have in the US schools that need to be accredited, I think you do too in Australia. And when Waikiki was accredited, the accreditor said they've never seen anything like it, that the whole staff and the community were focused on the same outcomes. They spoke the same language. You could see the habits of mind repeated at every grade level in every classroom. And that unity, that consistency, that bonding of a staff is one of the most amazing and phenomenal experiences I've ever had in a school.
Wow. It's a hard act to follow, Bena, but did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, it's so beautiful and it's so well said. I guess the only thing I would add is I'm not ready to be done. So if you're asking, what are my last words? I hope they're not.
I wasn't asking last words at all, don't get me wrong.
What I will say is that I do feel very much challenged by each, I would say that so we've been working together and with this for really 30 years. And I think that every maybe 10 years, some new cycle of something runs through education and through society. So it's not just education, it's like it affects the workplace, it affects everything. And so we've gone through these cycles, and I'm finding that the challenge to understand how to make something that's as classic as the habits of mind find their location in the many different contexts of change is very challenging, very exciting, and it continues to, I feel, grow the work. So when you found the context of, for example, looking at it through growth mindset, and then you found the context of then saying, well, growth mindset is good, but it doesn't quite describe it enough. And you went into the agile learner, and then you started putting it all together. To me, that's the most exciting thing, is to find new contexts, synergize, and bring them together so that it gives the work more meaning. So for that reason, I believe that it will have a life as long as people continue to shape it, work with it, and try to do what they can to make it both classic and flexible.
And James, I would also add to that much appreciation to you. You've been working with us for a good number of years, and over that time you have stretched our thinking, you have furthered the field, you've added to the literature, and you've strengthened the habits of mind tremendously with all of your work. And the leadership that you have given to it is very much noticed as well as appreciated. So we want to thank you very much for all that you have contributed not only to us, but to the schools around the world.
Thank you. That's very touching. I really do appreciate that. And moreover, I think, and I speak for a lot of people here, that I appreciate the work both of you have put into this over such a long period of time. That Bena used the word classic, and I think they're classics because they're authentic, they're real, they're part of the world, and they will find a home naturally in schools, in businesses, in families. And when we do that, and when we integrate the habits of mind into what we do, we see communities like Waikiki and the families that Bena talked about and the businesses that we're starting to see embrace the habits of mind really thrive. And they thrive because we are in this VUCA world, that volatile, uncertain, changeable, ambiguous world. And we need these habits of mind in order to thrive in that environment. And for the two of you to have gifted this work, this clarity around this work to the world, has served to make it a better place. And I know I speak for a lot of people when I express our deep gratitude for what you have done in that time. So thank you.
Good.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us here today with Art Costa and Bena Kallick. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've learned something new. I thought I was going to be repeating some old stuff, but always learn something new talking to these two beautiful people. Thank you both again, and hopefully we'll have a chance to have another conversation like this in the very near future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.